Hey guys, another video for you today. I'm going to show you example 2 on what we were working on today. So if you were a little confused with what we did in class today on example 1, example 2 I think will clear it up. So if you watch this, you should be good, and you can start working on those problems. We're going to work on them a little bit in class tomorrow, and then I'm also going to show you how to graph in radians tomorrow, and then we'll kind of move on from there. If you know how to graph in degrees, radians is not too bad because there's only one small change to it. So for those of you that were in senior seminar today, these were the notes that I gave. So you can just pause the screen and copy these down just so you'll have everything. I'm going to slide this up a little bit. And then if you want to pause it here and copy down example 1, you can do that, and then you'll have all of that information, and then I'm going to zoom in and go over example 2. Alright, so let's take a look at example 2 here. We're going to work it exactly like example 1. We're still going to use 5 points to draw our graph. We're still going to do an XY chart. We're going to label the middle. We're going to find all this information. All of it's going to be pretty much the same. It's just we're going to do a cosine problem rather than a sine problem. So I'm going to zoom in on example 2 to make this a little bit bigger here so we can all see what's going on. And I'm going to adjust my paper here so that we can see it and get a good picture here. Zoom out a little bit there. Okay. So here we go with example 2. Alright, so in looking at this example, I'm going to do it just like I did example 1. I'm going to go ahead and label A, B, C, and D. Labeling C is really not that big a deal, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it. But the -3 here, that's my A value. Now notice this one is negative, so that's actually going to do something to the graph, and I'll tell you that in just a minute. My B value is 2, it's the number that's in front of X. My C value in this case is the 180 over here, and then my D value is the +3. Okay? So if you remember from our notes, to find the amplitude, you take the absolute value of A. So if we do the absolute value of -3, that gives me +3. To find the period, remember we're going to do 360 divided by B. And in this case, my B value is 2, so I take 360 and we divide it by 2, and we get 180. The vertical shift, remember, is your D value, which is 3 in this case, but that is also, if you recall, our sinusoidal axis, which is the middle of the graph, so we'll label that in just a minute. Our horizontal shift is going to be where we start, so these two blanks will actually be the same. And to find the horizontal shift, you take what's in parentheses here with X, this 2X plus 180, and we set that equal to 0. And then we solve this. We're going to solve for X. So we subtract 180, we divide by 2, and we get -90. So notice this one is actually going to start over on the left-hand side of 0 here. So if my horizontal shift's -90, my start's -90. And then to get the end, take your start and add your period to it. So if I take -90 and add 180, that's going to give me a +90. Okay? And then for our increments, we always take our period, which in this case is 180, and we divide it by 4. And 180 divided by 4 is 45. So this time I'm going by 45 degrees. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and do an XY chart, T-chart here. And in my T-chart, I'm going to go ahead and put the 5 X values that I'm going to need for this graph. Now, I'm going to start with -90. Alright, and then I'm adding 45 to get my points, and I should have 5 of these points. So I'm going to start at -90, I should end at +90. So -90 plus 45 is -45. -45 plus 45 is 0. Add another 45, I'm at +45. And add another 45, and I'm at +90. Now if we look at this, started at -90, ended at +90, increments are 45. There's my 5 points that I'm going to put on my graph. That's my 5x values. Okay, so when I go to label my graph, what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to let each one of these marks represent 45. So I'm going to put negative 90 here. I'm going to go negative 45. 0 is still at 0. Positive 45 and positive 90. Okay, and then to get these y values, I can plug in the numbers for x, and I could plug those in and get out my y values, or we could do this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my sinusoidal on here, which is the middle of my graph, and that is at positive 3. So I'm going to go up to positive 3, and I'm going to draw a dashed line. Now everything works off of that line. Okay, now if you remember in class, we talked about for a sine curve, which was example 1 over here, and you can see the t-chart here. For the sine curve, my first, my third, and my last point were all on the sinusoidal, or they were on the middle. For a cosine curve, it's not your first, third, and your last. It actually turns out to be the second and the fourth. So if I were to plug in a negative 45 into this problem, and you can try it with your calculator and plug it in, but the answer that you're going to get here is going to be a positive 3. Okay? And then if you plug in a positive 45, you're also going to get a positive 3, because those 2 points are going to be on the sinusoidal. Now, as far as the other points go, when you plug these in, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what you'd get when you plug them in. You get a 0, a 6, and a 0 there. Now, if you'll notice, my amplitude is 3 in this problem, and notice the difference between all of these points is 3. Now, this one's going to graph a little bit different from our regular cosine curve. If you notice, up here at the top, when we did our cosine graph, it basically was a U shape that opened up. That's going to change a little bit. This one's going to open down in example 2, and the reason is because of that negative right there on my A value. Okay, that means it's going to open down to start with. So I'm just going to plot these points. So I've got negative 90, 0, negative 45, positive 3. Notice that is on the sinusoidal. 0, 6. I got to extend my graph a little bit here. 5, 6. There, and then 45, 3, and then 90 back at 0. So now my graph looks like that. Okay, and notice that is basically a sine curve or cosine curve that's been flipped, and the reason it flipped was because of that negative. If I took that negative out of the problem, then we would have had the regular U shape like we have up at the top there when I was showing you an example of a cosine curve. But that's how you graph a cosine and a sine graph. We did example 1 in class today. We're going to work on these in class tomorrow. Try a few of these on your homework sheet that I gave you, and then we'll answer some questions that you have at the beginning of class tomorrow. I'll give you some time to work a few of these, and then we're going to move on to radians. And radians will work just like this. The only difference will be how we find the period. Will change because everything, instead of being in degrees, is going to be in radian mode, and then our numbers down here on our axis will also be in radian mode. So we'll see you guys in class tomorrow.